More on Apple's Unleashed event. This is Mac Voices. This edition of Mac Voices is supported by the MacVoices Slack, available to Silver, Gold, and Platinum patrons of Mac Voices. Sign up today at patreon.com/MacVoices. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. This is part 2 in our coverage of the Unleashed event that Apple held this past Monday. This time around, we tap into a discussion about HDMI 2.0 versus 2.1, the always controversial notch, MagSafe, and start a discussion about the 1080p camera. Let's go to the panel and let them do the talking. To catch up with the chat room, because they're very talkative tonight. This is great. Eric says, yeah, Apple's not going to quit making CPUs unless they're somehow forced to. I hope this isn't sexist, ladies, but he said used female intuition, I guess, for your mutual appearance. It's super effective. Okay.
What?
We just knew we were going to both
the fact that you
be
two
here.
popped on together.
Yeah, I was going to say you could also, like, maybe we were sending signals because, you know, like you send signals, they're waves through our curly hair and they like amplified the signal.
You know, I took the rubber band out and my reception improved dramatically.
I questioned it earlier, but isn't it also because Chuck just let you in at the same time?
Yes.
Well, to some degree. But they both
Why
popped
would you
on.
ruin the magic, Jim?
Yeah, come on,
We
Jim.
both showed up
Oh,
magically at once, Jim.
Well, you still had to have showed up pretty close, but
They did. Oh, they did. Webb says his MacBook Pro ship date was moved from December to November today. I'm jealous, Webb. Congratulations. Eric says, keeping things in perspective, I ordered a Microsoft Ocean plastic mouse today. That's within my budget. Yeah. Okay. Let's see what
Ocean
else.
plastic?
So,
What's the
Kelly,
band say?
Microsoft is selling a mouse now where the big marketing point for it is all of the plastic in the shell for it is recycled from plastic that was reclaimed out of the ocean.
That's awesome.
oh,
I
Okay.
love it.
Thank you for clarifying that, Jeff.
That sounds pretty awesome, actually.
The
I got
other
one of those.
Jeff or in the chat room says when the M1s first, and this is a good question, when the M1s first came out, there was a lot of talk about the amount of RAM was not as important as in the past. Is that true? You can
Yes.
touch on that. So hang on
No.
to that, Kelly, because okay, hang on, guys. Yeah, there's a step in the wrong direction. It's nice to have expandability and upgradability. Excuse me. Talking about the fact that you can't upgrade these. And let's see. Webb said his only slight disappointment is that the Ethernet port is still a dongle. While Wi-Fi is still pretty good, but if available where I happen to be I prefer to be hardwired. So I kind of agree with that, but I also think that an Ethernet port may have just been too big for this.
physically
All right.
impossible.
I
Yeah.
really thought we were going to get the power brick with Ethernet in it like the iMacs got.
I didn't think we were going to, but I was hoping. And
Well,
maybe
I
that could
didn't.
still come. You can sell an accessory after the fact.
Right,
That's
but the MagSafe
Mhm.
isn't going to be able to connect to it.
Yeah.
MagSafe doesn't use
Yeah.
data.
I
And
don't
you
think it
know,
does use
I
data.
think the thing on the iMac, which nobody seems to think about. I mean, the reason why they have that, the whole magnetic connector for both power and Ethernet, is because the iMac is too thin for those connectors.
Oh, I know.
Right.
And so somebody was like, "Well, what are we going to do?" Oh, I know. We'll use a magnet, and then and also that magnet on the iMac is this, super studly, whereas the MagSafe, the whole point of it is, it's designed to come off, and you don't want that for something with data going through it.
Right.
Well, and the other thing too, though, I think I would have been horrified if they had put the Ethernet on the power supply, because this is a laptop. I mean, an iMac is one thing. It's going to sit on your desk and that's going to be it.
Mhm.
But
Right.
I'd much rather have a dongle to connect to Ethernet
Right.
that I can put on whichever port I want.
But if it's going to
And-
have a wire, if you're going to be connected to a thing, why not also be connected to power? That was part of why I thought it was kind of a gimme once we saw it on the iMacs. Was like, oh, that's totally a thing they could do for laptops, because then, we've given people a thing for free that we used to charge them $29 for. You're welcome. and everybody freaks out because they got their Ethernet port back. Yay. And so it just seemed sort of like an easy win for Apple in that respect. So that was sort of why I thought that's what was going to happen.
Kelly, if you've ever been to DubDub and wanted to download the new operating system in Xcode with the Ethernet things they have there, that you would know why you might be connected to Ethernet and not power.
Oh, no, I know. Like in that instance. But yeah, like if you're going to be connected to a cable, it just seemed like that would be an easy thing, you know, because like to your point, Chuck, like, yeah, if it's going to be a laptop, it's going to be a laptop. But if I have to get a wire to get the internet on it in the first place, then why not just plug it into power? Well, but then I'm still the person that sits over here and goes, give me 2 USB ports on my charger, Apple. Literally any of them. If you really want to be environmental, make me one charger with 2 ports so I can charge my thing that I bought from you and the other thing I bought from you. Thank you.
Well, an
Nobody
interesting
seems to
thing
get that either.
is no other vendor has done that.
Nobody does.
Well, but they could. There's nothing stopping other vendors. There's plenty of people that make USB-C chargers, power bricks that work with Macs. There's plenty of people that make USB-C dock, quote unquote, you know, boxes that you plug and you get USB-C and Ethernet or USB-A and Ethernet and whatnot. And you could pass power through that, but you still do need a power brick and that. But you can do it with one wire. And just plug in one wire and get your power and get your, your extra ports, your Ethernet and USB-A and all that. It's possible.
And let's not forget that you can definitely charge these computers without going through the MagSafe. Mm-hmm. That, you know, okay, it may not be as efficient, but you can still be charging it. And so therefore you plug in a dock or an adapter of some kind that has both Ethernet and the connectivity. Mm-hmm. And you're saving some of that.
And the 14-inch can fast charge through the wire. And what I read that the 16-inch can't do that now, but it sounds like it might be able to in the future, that the missing link is that there aren't power cables, USB-C cables that are compatible with the new USB-C power delivery. The MagSafe cable is, but you can't buy a just plain old USB-C cable, and it uses a higher voltage. It goes up to 48 volts now for USB-C power delivery.
I thought it was just a power issue because, like, if you look at the chargers they ship with, 14-inch comes with a 67, and the 16-inch comes with a 160 or some ridiculous
140,
number.
But
140.
But you can't currently take that 140 power and use a USB-C cable and plug that into one of the USB-C ports. I mean, you can do it, but it will throttle down. USB, protocol will not give the full power through that wire.
Yeah. Okay.
But it will do it through the USB-C to MagSafe wire. Mm-hmm. But from what I read, it sounds like in the future you will be able to buy a wire that will say, yeah, you're allowed to go up to this whole full 140. So in the future, you could fast charge without using MagSafe if you wanted to for some reason.
That wouldn't surprise me.
It's a little disturbing that Guy is so quiet. Does he not want to wake the cat?
Asleep.
Oh,
I'm suspicious.
The one thing that kind of surprised me was that they put an HDMI port in there instead of a couple more Thunderbolt 4 ports, which can easily be used for connecting up monitors. This is like the first laptop in the M series that is capable out of the box of supporting more than one monitor. So having an HDMI port along with, instead of Thunderbolt 4 ports just didn't seem to make much sense to me.
I'm with you. And the salt in the wound on that is it's a legacy port because it's HDMI 2.0, not 2.1. So you can do 4K 60 hertz. And if you want to do anything else, you get a dongle.
Mm-hmm. So you still have to go.
It is truly wasted space on that computer.
And, I agree with both of you, but boy, the internet is just full of people doing backflips over having that HDMI port there. I don't understand it. Personally, I would have preferred them just to put 4 USB-C ports or more, like they did before. That would have been my preference. That way you can choose and do whatever you want. Anyway.
I don't think that that's how the trade-off would have worked necessarily, but I'm pretty sure that HDMI port, as much as I'm like, dude, at that price, I want the latest one, I'm willing to bet that will cover 99% of the use cases for, oh crap, I don't have an HDMI port, which is, I have to use this piece of crap projector, 720p is fine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Brittany, you hit it right on the head. I think you hit it.
I'm going to disagree because, for one thing, people are going to buy this and they're still going to be using this machine 4 years from now. Mm-hmm. And secondly, people are going to want to, at least like for me, these ports are precious. I've got all of them in use on my computer. So if I've got a monitor that requires the new spec, that means I can't, that HDMI is just going to sit there vacant, doing nothing, and I have to use one of the remaining 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports. I would much rather that I could use that HDMI port and have that leave that open.
You can, Jim. Let me introduce you to my friend Monoprice. My friend Monoprice will hook you up.
In 4 years,
no.
Projectors won't be any different.
Correct.
People, I have an external monitor hooked up all the time.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with the projector. And I'm not sure what the...
as an office machine, I see what Brittany's saying. Like the monitor that you have now may not change in 4 years. If you have a 4K monitor now that's the current HDMI spec and not something newer, then you'll be fine for a long time. And if not, you can probably buy a cable, because a lot of the time the display cable isn't hardwired to the back of the display anymore, which is great news. Because then you can get DisplayPort to Thunderbolt or HDMI or mini DisplayPort or VGA or whatever the crap you want, so that you can plug the thing into the other thing and then you're done. And that's one of the things that's been really nice about Apple finally forsaking ports and just making everything be USB-C, is because the options available to us for the kind of stuff that we can plug into our computers expanded dramatically at that point.
Go ahead, Brittany.
I like Jim, I did have a moment of like, oh, lower my head and kick a rock and go, aw, shucks, because 4 is better than 3. But I am wondering if the real life, like computational bus trade-off was, guess what? You want to process data from potentially an HDMI and also the SD slot. You want to have these other things, have the other power source. It might have been, okay, that's 1 USB-C.
So David, I think brings up our David brings up an interesting point in the chat room. He uses an OWC dock with the Ethernet. And I kind of think that this is where these are pro machines. Mm-hmm. They are meant to be portable, obviously. And I think Brittany hit it. Okay, I've got an HDMI port. The only thing I don't have is an Ethernet port to connect if I'm out running around. But other than that, I really don't need a dongle for anything else. I'm probably not going to sit there and be like, if I'm going to be super productive, I'm going to be sitting at my desk, sitting this down, plugging it into some kind of dock where I have multiple monitor connections, where I have Ethernet, where I have additional storage devices. Yeah. And I'm not going to be dependent on the lower, quote unquote, lower quality HDMI. And if I want to drive a monitor out through that as an ancillary monitor, but it's not going to be my main monitor. So I guess we're doing exactly what everybody else does. We want to spec the machine exactly the way we want to spec the machine. And Apple's saying, we address this for professionals. We understand that they're going to have extra hardware connected to it at times, and we're okay with that.
Mm-hmm. I'm still having a problem with this because Apple created this pro machine that they're saying, look, professional video editing right here on this machine. But we're not going to give you the port that you actually need, even though we put the port on there. It's not the right one. And now, Brittany, your use case where you're going out to a conference or some other event where, oh crap, I need to plug in to this projector and no one has a dongle. Okay. Yes, for that situation, this HDMI port is totally fine. But if that's the reason they put the port on there, just so that we'd be covered at conferences for presentations, they put the port on for the wrong reason.
I'm willing to bet it's because people complained, and I'm willing to bet that was most of the complaints.
Oh yeah, I'm certain that HDMI port and the SD card slot are on there to shut us up as users. Apple is so tired of hearing us talk about not having an HDMI port, not having an SD card slot, that they're like, fine, we'll put it on there, just leave us alone.
Now be quiet. Yeah.
But the problem with that is now I'm worried that Apple may become too wishy-washy on what they're going to do and listen too much to what the echo chamber says, and then start building computers that, instead of giving us what we need, give us what a loud subset of people want. I hope that doesn't happen.
I hope not too. I'm not going to worry about it until I'm actually seeing it. But yes, that's obviously too far the other direction also.
Yeah.
Guy?
Yeah, I don't think Apple will do that. Apple has,
but I think they just did.
No, they didn't give us any USB-A ports.
I think they, when you look at what they did with the keyboard, I would say that was more along the lines of what you're talking about. As far as the ports go, I think they mostly put those on because they could, rather than because they thought that the user base was going to revolt or whatever if they weren't on there. Because they've done other machines before that everyone screamed at, this is the wrong thing for the wrong reason, and they sold like hotcakes anyway. So,
and these computers are going to, well, clearly they already are selling faster than Apple can keep up with inventory.
This is also the first generation for M series large MacBook Pros.
Right.
Sure. So,
and
the same thing happened when the 13-inch Air and original MacBook Pro came out. They sold like crazy too, because those were the first M1 portable Macs. And
it's
now
1.0.
Yeah. Now we're saying here is our next level of processor that has all of this great stuff in it that we spent way too long talking about and putting people to sleep for. And, people are going to just eat it up, and they pretty much are. But some of the things that Apple's never going to go back to is going to be putting in more RAM, putting in a discrete graphics card. Those days are gone. And anyone who's expecting that to happen again is kidding themselves. That we're never going to see that again, because part of the reason why these machines are so fast is because all this stuff is integrated.
It's the sock.
Right.
Yeah. And
even though I'm sitting here complaining about what I'm calling legacy ports being put on these, if I was in the market to buy a new Mac today, I would be all over that 16-inch M1 Pro Max, throwing in extra RAM and storage, and I'm getting hot and I need to go have a minute alone. Whew.
Today's Mac Voices is supported by the MacVoices Slack. Available as a benefit to Silver, Gold, and Platinum patrons of Mac Voices, the MacVoices Slack is where you can connect with the members of the MacVoices Live panel and other MacVoices patrons. Get in on the discussions, agree or disagree with our opinions, and get your voice heard. Sign up at patreon.com/MacVoices. And thanks for supporting Mac Voices.
And I did want to say, although I agreed with Jeff about the HDMI port, they haven't taken anything away effectively, because from the old machines had 4 ports, and the new machines have 3 ports, but the power is separate. So you still effectively have 3 Thunderbolt ports. So, the HDMI is just extra. It's not that big of a deal. In a perfect world, I think it's kind of disappointing that they didn't use the latest standard, but whatever.
But also it's 1.0. And now here's the thing that I'm waiting for, and it's not even a particular machine or a particular port. What I'm waiting for is, remember how we used to get I mean, it was corporate, but remember how we used to get shade from Apple? Some of us may remember this back from the Motorola days when Apple would sort of come out and say things like, you know, we'd really love to have a new processor for you right now, but the 68K processor, or, you know, the PowerPC processor, like they just can't increase the speed on them anymore. We're waiting for Motorola to get their poop in a group and give us a faster processor for you. And it's not happening. And so that's why like all of that stopped in the first place. And Apple went, well, we'll show you. We're just going to go team up with Intel. Take that. And so they did. And then after that, we got Intel machines for a while, and then Apple ended up having to do the same thing. And, you know, gee willikers, if Intel could just get their poop in a group, you'd get faster machines, but we can only use the fastest chips that Intel makes, and Intel's not making any faster ones right now. And so what I'm looking forward to is is the point when we get these like we get phones. So next fall, we get another wave of machines, and it's like, desktops are the odd numbered years and laptops are the even numbered years. And every year in the fall, we get the phones in September and the Macs in October, the end. So I remember a time when in the olden days, when it was, I think it was Mac, you guys will have to correct me on this, but it was either Macworld in January or Macworld in June, and we'd get hardware at one and software at the other. So we got like new laptops in like hardware in January, software in June, I want to say is how it went. And so like every year there'd be one of the machines would get revised in some way, and we'd get some different iteration of it. And then later we'd get, you know, what the new operating system was going to look like that everything was going to run. And I want to know when we're going to get back to that, because now that it's up to Apple, like, we know Apple is capable of building their own processor and system on a chip every year because they've been doing it since 2007. So is this where laptops are headed? Are we going to get new laptops every year and then it's not going to be as big a deal anymore? Like, where are we headed with this? That's what I want to know.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, Brittany kind of proved her geek cred by putting in the chat room that she watched the processor talk 3 times. So
it was so hot.
It was.
See, there you go.
I'll be in my bunker.
I'll be in that bunker.
So in a bit of comic relief from the chat room, Benjamin says, my office projector still uses VGA. Can we get a VGA port on the back of the next MacBook Pro?
Yeah, it's going to be right next to the ADB port.
He's that guy.
Yeah. Eric, I'm gonna leave you one comment for a minute because it's going to launch a whole different discussion. But Brian also says, I'm sure my business has spent more on dongles in the last 5 years than what a new projector would have cost. Yeah, that's probably true. And then we were having a discussion about, you know, the fact that the RAM and the expandable RAM and storage, you know, would limit, because it's integrated, limits how powerful the device can be, but you also lose the benefit of the integration.
Yeah,
he would still like to see
RAM is not as important as it used to be. Now
I disagree.
Right. Because the processing situation is fundamentally different than it was with Intel machines.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, but on my M1, my 8 gigs of RAM makes me cry a lot.
I completely disagree, and most of the developers I know disagree with that. Bytes are bytes, and you know, the fact that the processor's different doesn't, you know, change that.
But Brittany, from what you said,
is different.
Yeah, but
they're not really handled differently.
But Brittany,
there's a different instruction set.
Brittany, what you were describing that you're trying to do with your machine is not for that consumer level machine. I mean, no wonder.
No, I thought these were coming out like in June. So
yeah,
I didn't think I'd have to do any editing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, surprise.
Okay, so first of all, I have breaking news. I just received an email that my MacBook is going to get here earlier. So I have now joined the web club in November. So
that's awesome.
Good for me. And Eric mentioned the word that we really haven't touched on much here, and that's notch.
Oh, I was gonna say courage.
Okay, one for Brittany. Does it? I've got to start. People, get over the notch. Stop complaining. Big deal. What?
Who cares?
And Mark, I can't remember if Mark made the point earlier, before the show started or during his comment, but he really did hit it, where they've actually given you more screen real estate by narrowing the bezel. They just had to take a little piece back to put the camera in.
And
what's the big
it's
deal?
right where the menu bar is. So
You know-
it's
Where
where
the menu bar is, yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know how every time we have an event and Apple Sherlock somebody and we all go, oh, we're all sad for because Apple came out with their and now like their business model's doomed, right? Like we hear that all the time. Apple and their mindfulness app is coming for Calm. Like we heard it. It's not secret. You know who's sending Cupertino fruit baskets every Friday from now until the heat death of the universe? Bartender. That's who. Bartender was
until
just given
Apple
a
Sherlocks
gift.
them.
I don't think that's going to happen. I think Apple just gave Bartender a giant gift because if it weren't for Bartender, like I wouldn't even know what to do with my menu bar. It would be a disaster. And the stuff that needs to be like, okay, so for people who don't know, Bartender, Jeff, you probably are pulling up the URL right now.
Setup.
I don't have setup. I buy things.
But
I buy
it's
software
in setup.
licenses. I know, but I don't have setup, so I don't have the URL handy for the actual thing. Jeff's going to pull it up for me. I can tell.
Yep.
Because we're on the same
It's like you
wavelength
know
when
me.
it comes to Bartender. And Bartender is a utility, and it's a very inexpensive utility at macbartender.com. And you install it, and it lets you configure all that stuff that runs across your menu bar and then stops because like it bumps up against the help menu from the other application that you're running. It helps you organize all that stuff. So like, for example, my Dropbox icon only shows up in the menu bar when it's doing a thing. And then the rest of the time, it just hides. And then if I have other things that I want to have show up there all the time, they can show up all the time, or they just, when the status changes, like I have trip mode and things like that I use, only like when it needs my attention, does it do a thing? And then the rest of the time, it's not even up there. So I have like, half a dozen little icons over there. And then if I need to actually see something, I can go up there and click and see the rest of my icons and do the thing I need to do and then get out of it again. And Bartender is super inexpensive. It's not a subscription. It's a glorious app. It always supports the new version of the operating system. I've never had anything but lovely experience with any time I've ever emailed their support for things. And yes, most of the time it was my fault. So it wasn't like they had faulty software. It was just me going, here's the thing I did. And they were like, yeah, check the box for, if you're Kelly and you do this, it's not going to work. Just go uncheck that and it'll be fine. I'm like, okay, that's me. So it's a super great app. I'm very excited about it. And the reason I'm excited about it is because it does exactly the thing that it's supposed to do. And that's all it does. And it never gets in my way. And it's exactly like you want an actual bartender to be, which is show up, do the thing they need to do, and then stay out of your way until you need them again. It is the greatest. It's probably one of the greatest things I have installed on my machine. I know I'm a person given to overstatement, but I do not take software lightly. And this is a fantastic app.
Okay, so
here's my problem that I'm seeing with the notch. And I'm not complaining about the notch because sure, we're getting extra screen space and that's great. The problem is that that stuff's going to run into where the notch is. And that's going to be a problem until developers figure out what they need to do for their apps to address that.
To route around.
This is why Bartender is going to be great because it can take all that stuff that's on the right and drop it like below the main menu bar so it won't be in the notch. That's solved. But Apple, they already have developers on Twitter saying, okay, developers, if you need or if you want to account for the notch, you need to start changing how you have your menus in the menu bar and consolidate them so there's not as many menus because it's going to run into the notch and people aren't going to see stuff. So
it's supposed to automatically jump over the notch, the menus.
Yeah.
Well,
and it I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, I don't love the notch, but I think it's fine. It's not the end of the world.
It's not going to be a problem 6 months from now.
I do have a 32-inch 4K monitor, and I have Bartender, but still my menu items go past the center of the screen.
Same.
And sometimes I've had apps that have had their menu items go past the half of the screen. But as far as the API goes, I don't think that's a problem in general. Very, very little developer change is going to be needed, because for most of the time that screen real estate is controlled by Apple. The menu bar really belongs to Apple, and so they have already made the changes. In fact, one of the unfortunate things is apparently you probably haven't seen this, but there hasn't been an Xcode beta release. There wasn't for quite like a month and a half or something, and developers are like, where's the Xcode 13 release candidate, and how are we supposed to make Monterey apps? And apparently Apple was holding it up because it had information about the notch in the SDK, and so they held it up to keep the secret, which I think that was kind of not great, but whatever. But anyway, so as long as the menu bar is going, Apple's going to take care of it. If the menu's too long, then it'll jump and continue on the other side. And you already could have menu bar items run into menus. That could happen already. So, not a big deal. And apparently, I just read earlier today that if you run your mouse across the top of the screen and you go over the notch, the arrow will jump down and then jump back up when you get to the other side. So the only case where it might affect apps is if they're full screen mode. But by default, what apps do when you go into full screen is it will go into full screen and just blank out the top section where the notch is. So that's the default behavior for apps, and that's why it's not going to take 6 months, because it does that now. So basically, if you go into full screen, well, then that notch space turns back into a bezel. Now, what apps can do is they can opt in and say, I don't want that. I'm going to be cognizant of that notch, and I'm going to, I want to use that space. So apps can set a flag, and then it will let them use the entire space, and then the app will have to be programmed to, handle the notch. But
that's another thing that Apple was talking about on Twitter today, saying, do that, and you can do cool stuff up in that space.
I'll bet the number of apps that do that will be barely more than the number of apps support the touch bar.
I bet you're right. Until the notch is on every display that Apple sells.
Well, and it's never going to be on an external display.
Right.
Well,
Apple'd have to make one first.
Yeah. So now we've got the problem that we had with the touch bar. Do you invest in doing something with that space or not?
It's also not very much space.
Do you? Okay, so when I first saw it, my first thought was, this is just paving the road for Face ID on your Mac. And so talking about it not coming to every display, I might disagree, because maybe then Face ID will come to iMacs, because Apple controls the whole thing there too. So maybe that's a thing that could happen. I don't know.
I think the one thing that's disappointing about the notch is, they did that and we didn't even get center stage.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, you got a 1080p camera and it only took them 5 years longer than it absolutely should have. So, and you're welcome.
That notch is also way wider than the camera is. Why is that?
Jim, the reason we couldn't get center stage is because Apple needed the horsepower to drive that HDMI 2.1 port that they put on the computer. Oh, wait.
Jim, I actually thought of you when we were during the event, because it was like, Xcode will compile your app 4 times faster. But I was only partly paying attention because I was trying to reply to somebody. So I heard, this computer will compile Xcode 4 times. And it was like right after the battery talk. So I was like, wow, that's a lot better than the ones they have now.
I
I know a lot of mobile
I did not
developer
see that
friends.
claim.
thought that was
I
fun.
am actually, a programming dinosaur. I use Objective-C, and it's blazing fast. I could care less if it's faster.
I just thought it was like my first thought, because I know a lot of people who live in Xcode all day long professionally who are always complaining about Xcode and the time it takes. And so
they're
when
really
I heard that,
complaining
I was
about
like,
they're really complaining about the Swift compiler, which is kind of ironic.
probably.
The Swift
But
compiler is quite slow.
It amused
let
me
me-
greatly, like, oh, you can compile 4 times. Ooh.
So let me catch up with the chat room here. First of all, I want to publicly thank Webb, who called his buddy Tim and pushed me up the line for the MacBook Pro delivery. So thank you, Webb.
That's awesome like that.
Yeah.
Web?
Brian, though, asks a fair question. Do you know why it needed to be a notch rather than just a pinhole? If it doesn't have Face ID, I may have missed something. Is it just a camera? And Eric brought up an interesting point that I also never need a webcam. So if I were buying a MacBook Pro, I'd like to have a no-notch option at least. Choice is nice. So why don't we just have a pinhole camera?
But if you take a flashlight and shine it at the camera that's on your current Mac laptop, you'll see there's more than just a camera there, because there is a sensor.
One of the ambient light sensors is in there that controls true tone. And if you have like the backlight adjustment on your keyboard and the brightness setting, all of that stuff happens with multiple sensors, but one of them is there.
I'm confused about that. Isn't a camera a high-resolution ambient light sensor?
Yes, but it's
I'm
not
actually kind of
that
serious. Like,
ambient light sensor.
can't you find out the ambient light from the camera?
Not until it went 1080p. Look, okay, for people who don't listen, Charlotte and I have been complaining about the 720 FaceTime camera in these machines forever. Like, even when I got my machine, I was like, well, it's a good thing I already own a webcam, because this 720 nonsense in the processor in the laptop of the future when I got my M1 was nonsense, and it's still nonsense. But that was part of what was sort of interesting about it. So
I have a theory about why the notch is the width it is.
I do too. What's yours?
Branding.
Okay.
Interesting point.
I just thought it was because when they start jamming more stuff up there, the notch won't ever get any wider, and they'll be like, look at all the extra stuff that's up there now. Ooh.
They could always change it. They just changed the one on the phone. I think, it's that notch is now an Apple branded thing. That indicates it's an Apple device.
Mm-hmm.
Eric says, I wonder where Apple put the ambient light sensor in the PowerBook G4. Wherever it was, it worked like a charm. Interesting point.
If you shine your light on the speaker grills,
yeah, it's in the speakers.
You'll see where the ambient light sensor and microphones are.
Next time on Mac Voices, we wrap up our coverage of Apple's Unleashed event by continuing the discussion, and it turns into a bit of a debate over the 1080p camera, talk about the HomePod Mini and why there may or may not be color matching issues at Apple, and a whole lot more. Please check back with us then. I know you will enjoy it. Until then, and as always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.